All right, I cracked the code. We are live on Facebook on our main Las Vegas Tri Club page. We're recording. It's Saturday night.
No, I think it's Sunday night.
Oh, there you go.
It's Sunday night.
Yeah, there's gonna be an interesting talk tonight then.
That's the first time I think either of us have actually messed up the night on their introduction. So yeah, it's Sunday night. We both had a pretty busy weekend. You raced yesterday in St. George. Congratulations, winning your age group, and a nice run, by the way. Was it 48?
Yeah,
The
48.
10K?
I was pleased to be under 50 for where I'm at. I was really I felt good with that. So
Yeah. I was having a quick look at that yesterday, and I was impressed by that. It was a fast race. There were some really fast people.
there really were some fast people, and I'm so glad. I'm glad that BBSE has attracted some fast competition. So that was really good to see some fast times. And yeah, I did what was I 57, 58 on the bike, which is a fairly good bike ride for me on that course. And the winner and a couple of other cyclists were down at the 51-minute range. That's
I know.
solid. That's really that's a solid bike ride. And that's 7 minutes. And that's
Yeah, that's a lot of time in an Olympic distance race. And I know that's not even a full Olympic distance, right? Isn't it
no,
only, is
it's
it
like
short?
30 miles now. So
Yeah. Yeah. So, but still, I mean, that's a big gap,
yeah.
6 or 7 minutes. Um, and the thing is that, you're not a poor cyclist, right? Like, so that's pretty significant.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I still
So
feel fairly strong on the bike, and so yeah, and I I didn't know where I was. It ended up being a two loop on the run, mostly because of the heat. Travis, the race director, changed the run course on the morning of the race, so we would do two loops. So you pass by your aid stations more than once. You pass by them twice. Actually, you pass my multiple times more because you're going out and back and hitting them. So that was a good call race wise. And at that point, though, so many people are coming and going, and you got the sprint race, you got the 5K, you got the 10K run, and so you got no idea who was where. In fact, when I was coming in on my second loop, or starting the second loop, actually, someone passed me and had Olympic 63 on his calf. And I'm like, oh no, that's my age group. And so then it was actually good because then I had to try to stick with him. And he got about 30 yards ahead of me. And I'm like, I tried to close the gap and I just did not have it in me to close the gap. And then I got thinking, I'm like, well, maybe he's only doing his first loop. And so we're coming in towards the finish, and the turnaround is, 50 yards from the finish. And I'm just waiting for him to hit that turnaround, because if he doesn't hit that turnaround, I would give it one more last big push. But he turned around, and I'm like, oh, whew, okay, that's good.
oh man, that's stressful.
Yeah.
That's some added anxiety.
Yeah, but that's the fun part. I enjoyed that, enjoyed trying to chase him down, and that actually helped me, run a little bit more and try to up it just a bit. So that was good.
Awesome. Um, I didn't talk to you about this off air, but I had a little bit of a stressful week coaching this week. It was
Oh,
interesting. So I had somebody competing at the U.S. Nationals, the multi-sport nationals in Omaha.
okay.
So I'm going to give a shout out to Stephanie. So many of you actually have met Stephanie. So she competed in 5 events, and she won her age group in all of them,
Wow.
and was first female overall in, was it 3 of them, and second in 1. It was amazing. But I was like, all week I've been like on the tracker, and it's just she's just done such a super job. So it was the open water swim for multi-sport. She won that. Then she did this, oh man, I can't remember, the aqua bike,
Okay.
which was the actual national championship. She won that overall. Then she did this super sprint triathlon. I think she finished second in that in overall, but first in her
Oh,
age group. aquathon. So
Okay.
swim and then run. She got second in her age group, seventh
Wow.
overall. Her run is a work in
Yeah.
progress. And then she did the draft legal sprint triathlon. This was once again for the national championship. And she got second overall and won her age group.
Wow.
So a super 5 days
That's
for her. It
awesome.
was, and that's the thing, it's kind of crazy. Or I think it was over 4 days, 5 events in 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to keep going like day after day after day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like I was nervous and stressed for her,
Mm-hmm.
and feeling anxiety. I can't imagine getting on the start line that many times,
Mm-hmm.
even when you're trying to win a national championship on several of them. So anyways, big shout out to her. I asked her if I could give her a shout out on the podcast because she does listen. And
That's awesome.
so a big shout out. Yeah.
That is great. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations to her and congratulations to you. And one more time on her name.
Stephanie Oshner, and she's in
Oh,
the female 35 to 39 age group.
that's awesome. Well, congratulations, Stephanie.
Yeah, so that's awesome. So anyways, tonight, let's talk about the heat,
Yeah.
because the heat hit people kind of hard this week,
Yeah.
at least in Las Vegas. So now the smart people got the heck out of Las Vegas, and that's what I did. I'm up
Yes.
in Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah. It was brilliant.
I didn't plan on the first heat of the year, me leaving the day that it was going to get hot.
Yeah.
But I drove up to Coeur d'Alene. I took my time, did a 3-day drive, and was kind of stopping along the way, doing bike rides and runs and stuff along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And but it got really hot in Las Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, smart people got out. Today I did a almost 5-hour bike ride at 71 degrees. So yes, I'm winning, and that's the best way to do heat training is just get out of the heat.
That's right.
But for those of you that can't get out of the heat and can't avoid the heat, and not just obviously in Las Vegas, but throughout North America and even into Europe right now, I mean, things are getting hot.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to continue to train, we have to kind of do it in, well, in my opinion, in a responsible way.
Mm-hmm.
So, John, me saying that, what is the first thing that comes to your mind as far as like training in the heat and being responsible?
Core temperature. The number one
Yeah.
issue, and just so people know, we do have a funny delay between us. So every now and then you hear a little bit of a gap. It's because our internet is not agreeing too much. Core temperature, though, people will die from being too hot. That's the key. And the important thing is, especially here in Las Vegas, when it gets to 110 degrees, you've got to do everything you can to manage core temperature. Sweating is one of those things that happens that helps your core temperature because you lose heat through the process of letting the sweat be evaporated. And we know that when we get out of the pool, actually here in Vegas, we've talked about this before. I get out of the pool, it's 100+ degrees, and I actually get cold. That's because it's so dry here that all that water gets whisked off the skin. That's how effective the heat loss of evaporation is. And so being able to sweat is a key component to maintaining core temperature, which means you need to be drinking. And so people will talk about dehydration as a risk. It's not dehydration that's really the big risk. The big risk is core temperature.
Yeah, super. There's a world leader, Doug Casa. He came to Las Vegas this year and gave a few talks for us. And he mentioned that exact thing. There's no, I can't remember the exact quote, but basically in North America, no one in sports has ever died from dehydration. Right. It's the heat that actually will kill you in the core temperature. You'll like with the dehydration thing, when you get to a certain point of dehydration, you'll just stop going.
Yeah, that's right.
Like,
and there's certainly a risk to dehydration, but large levels of when you're talking 20% your body weight loss due to dehydration. Now, if I'm almost 200 pounds, so if I lose 20% of my body weight, that means I'm going down to 160 pounds. That's a huge change in body temperature. It's a huge loss of water. That's where you can run into organ failure. You can have kidney problems. That's where you're at risk. But for the vast majority of what we call dehydration, which can be anywhere from 2 to maybe 5% of your body weight, that you're not in jeopardy because of dehydration. You're in jeopardy because you're going to get too hot.
Yep. Yeah. The other thing that was a big takeaway from the talk that he gave, he is the head of medical for a 12K race in New England in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And they run between two towns. I wish I could remember the name of it, but anyways, he was basically saying that the distances you're most likely to have heat stroke in are about up to 15K.
Mm-hmm.
So between like 8K and 15K.
Yeah.
If you go longer than that, you actually, it's really hard to get your core temperature up high enough and sustain that. It's really going intense for around an hour. So super, super hard running, and particularly running for a shorter amount of time. If you look at even into Ironman, and we look at Kona, and we look at races in Asia, in Australia, where they race in very, very hot conditions, you never see reports of people dying of heat stroke.
Right.
And the reason is because the intensity is not high enough. And it's the same, it's the same with, with half Ironman, where we would potentially see this is in like Olympic distance racing in the run portion, or in sprint distance racing in the, if you're really hot on the bike and hot on the run. 5Ks, we don't normally see this because it's you can get hot, but it's not long enough to get your core temperature high enough.
Right.
And so it really has a lot to do with the intensity. So the actual danger of training and getting heat stroke is actually really low, because the intensity in general is not hard enough. But that doesn't mean you're not at risk day after day after day of chronically being in a stressed situation. And that's the thing that I really wanted to kind of touch on is we talked a lot in this podcast about mitigating overall stress. And how our body, and we've talked about the stress response many, many times. Well, if you're constantly putting yourself in a situation where you're constantly having elevated core temperature, 102, 103 degrees, where you're not in heat stroke, you're not in heat exhaustion, but you're constantly elevated, you're going to affect many of the systems in your body and put your body under undue stress. And it makes it really, we talked about this last week, it makes it even harder to recover, to go again the next time. So with that being said, John, what are ways that when you train and it's hot that you think about, or what are some plans that you go into a long training session or a hard training session with in the summer?
No, I love it. And I like how you talked about the race intensity as being one of the key factors with potential for heat injury. And I've used this analogy before. I use it in my class a lot. When we're exercising, what we're doing is we're taking chemical potential energy, glucose and fats, and transforming that to mechanical energy. Well, if we have 100 units of chemical energy, the way that we transform that, we're only going to get about 25% of that energy that's actually going to help us move forward. The other 75% is going to go off as heat. And so when we're exercising harder, we're transforming that chemical energy to mechanical energy faster and faster and faster, which means we're generating a lot of heat. And so you're spot on that the intensity of the exercise is one of the key factors with how much core temperature will change during the course of an exercise session. And then if you draw that out to a longer intense session, that's going to be where your core temperature can really jump up. So one of the things, and you've already said this, is if you're training in the heat, you end up just going slower. Your brain actually starts detecting rises in core temperature. It's probably detecting skin temperature changes even before detecting core temperature changes, but that's one of the triggers. And so what your brain does is start to shut down muscles from contracting, because every time the muscle contracts, 75% of that energy that's gone from the chemical state to the mechanical state, that's going off as heat. So you generate less heat, and that helps you not get as hot.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that the thing with going long is versus short. So short and intense, you can oftentimes override it. Short things like once again, think about a 10K, and your core temperature starts to go up at 8K. you can override that mentally for like, hey, the finish line is just around the corner. I'm going to be done in like 6 minutes or 7 minutes. Whereas if you're going long, like an Ironman or a half Ironman, and you got 10 miles to go, you can't override it.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, the last men's Kona, when Blumenfeld kind of fell off with about 3 or 4, was it 5 miles, 5 or 6 miles to go? He had good, they were taking core data on him. And sure enough, his temperature started to go up. And he even in the interviews afterwards said, you know, I wanted to keep going, but I couldn't. And it was not that his legs were giving out on him or his cardiovascular system was going out on him.
Mm-hmm.
It was literally, he couldn't mitigate the heat.
Yeah.
Right. This is the same guy that not even a year, well, but a year earlier, we saw what he did at Tokyo in the heat, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he collapses at the finish line after he wins, but it's once again, it's a shorter distance. So you can override that for a short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
But once again, at these longer distances, you really can't override it.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, you know, John, let's say you did a 5-hour ride today, which I know you didn't because you raced yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't really be at risk of heat stroke.
No, low intensity.
Yeah, because you're low intensity. Even, I mean, even if you couldn't, if you didn't, let's say you did 5 hours, your typical ride, you go to Searchlight, right?
Yeah.
You go to Searchlight and back. And let's say you didn't have any water. What would end up happening to you?
If I ran out of water, I would just go really slow, or I'd have to, I'd end up stopping and then try to call and get a ride.
Exactly. Because
Yeah.
and that's the thing, right? You're not gonna, once again, you're not gonna be going at an intensity that you can generate enough heat to give yourself heat stroke. Now, let's hypothetically say you were doing an off-road thing and there's nobody that came by.
Mm-hmm.
And you're out in the elements for days. Yeah, then potentially we could run into a situation. But you're exactly right. Like you would, number one, you would slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, you'd be looking on the side of the road. Did anyone throw away a bottle of water?
Yeah,
Right?
right.
Like, whatever it takes at that point, you'll drink almost anything.
Yeah.
Number three, you're gonna call somebody, or you may flag a car down even. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I need help, right?
Yeah.
I've done it before where I've actually, I literally did it this week on one of my rides. It was a little hotter than I thought. I didn't bring enough water. And I got to this little campground area and I pulled in and I asked a family, I'm like, do you have any water? They're like, because I was thirsty, right? And
Yeah.
it was not going to be heat stroke, but like I was like getting to the point where it's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, they gave me some water and I was happy. But it's amazing how that drive for thirst will actually make you do a lot of things. Number one is go slower.
Right. And that's why it's so important. You asked earlier about things that you do in training the heat. The number one thing that I do, besides hike go easy, is make sure that I plan the right amount of hydration, or I planned where to refill, and they're dependable refill stations, not ones that you're not sure if it's there or not. And so, yeah, so, you know, if I'm riding the Searchlight, I'm taking a Camelback. I may actually take an extra bladder with me if it is during the summer. And then when I get to Searchlight, I always have my credit card and cash with me. And I'll go in, I'll make sure I'm getting ice, some water, drinks, I'm drinking, and then I'm going. But I'm not drinking to prevent dehydration, although that is the effect. I'm drinking to keep core temperature low. And so I'll also pour a lot of water on me. When I was racing, even in St. George this last weekend, I was taking a lot of water in my mouth, but I was not swallowing it. I was actually getting it back over on me. It sounds disgusting, but you know, I wanted that evaporative effect to help keep me cool. I wasn't too worried about getting dehydrated, and so, you know, it's a relatively short event, you know, just a little over 2 hours. So,
But intense.
intense, yeah, intense, but still, I wasn't as worried about dehydration as I was worried about staying cool and getting myself wet and letting that evaporative effect happen.
It's interesting you mentioned the getting wet. So we're fortunate in the Southwest that works, right? If you're in the Southeast or you're somewhere really humid, if relative humidity is high, getting wet really doesn't do a whole lot for you.
That's right.
Because you can get the evaporative
hot and humid environments are so dangerous is because the sweat mechanism is interfered with. It's not, your sweat is not evaporating. If you're just wiping your sweat off, it's not taking the heat away in the same sense as it does here in a dry climate.
Now, don't get me wrong. When I've raced in Miami, I still am pouring water all over myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, it it still
It
feels good,
feels
and maybe
good.
actually helps get your skin temperature a little bit
Yeah,
cooler, which is
yeah,
that we have our a lot of the sensations actually from skin
that's right.
temperature.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's, like ice down the top, whatever
Yeah.
it is. But I love the fact that you mentioned about even going out to Searchlight and getting wet, because when I am commuting in the summer on my bike, I usually it's an hour. So,
Mhm,
one water bottle is fine because I know I'll be able to get home, and I
mhm.
for sure have water at home, and there's
Yeah,
fountains along the way. But one water bottle is just for showering as I'm going.
yeah,
I get to the light and I'm pouring water on myself,
yep, that's right.
and I'm adding to that evaporative cooling.
Mhm.
Same in if I'm training and doing a longer ride in the summer, anytime I get to a water source, I have one bottle that's never Gatorade or anything. It's just water,
Mhm.
right? One that's Gatorade or whatever. And so that one always fill it, pour it on myself, get myself completely wet,
Yeah.
then drink some, then
Mhm.
fill it up so I'm filled to go again. And I think it's important to think about that, is if you're bringing 2 or 3 bottles, have one that's just water that you can use like that,
Yeah.
because that makes a significant difference. And you'll notice maybe 10 minutes later when your jersey is dry again.
Mhm.
But what happened was it evaporated the heat. The heat actually evaporated away from you,
Yeah.
and it's an extremely uh, good mechanism for reducing your heat.
No, totally. And yeah, I usually buy a gallon of water if I'm doing a ride and I stop in, and I just take that gallon of water and just pour it all over and then drink some. But yeah, that evaporative mechanism is really effective, and especially in our climate down here.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the mechanisms that happen with adaptation, why adaptation is so important, and how we can best adapt to the heat, because you can, right? you
Yeah.
you absolutely, it's funny, right? We used to have to kind of guess, and now
Mhm.
on your Garmin or whatever, your Wahoo, whatever, it tells you, oh, you're this percentage adapted to this temperature.
Mhm.
That's plus or minus, but there is mechanisms that occur. So I can tell you, for example, in high schools, in high school sports, there's actually rules in the summer for before football practice starts. There are certain times then they have to practice outside without pads on with this amount
Mhm.
of time, and then the time builds up, and then eventually more gear gets put on them, and they're doing that to adapt.
Mhm.
People do this when they go to Kona, right? They want to go to Kona early. And one of the reasons you should go to Kona early or go to a hot race early is to let your body adapt to the heat. So, John, what are some of the common things or common mechanisms that happen as we adapt to higher temperatures?
So talked about, transforming energy, and that transformation is not perfect, and 75% of your energy is going off as heat as your exercise. So you adapt to that. Your body learns to manage that heat better. So what happens? Your body will actually learn to sweat sooner in exercise,
Yep.
because it's trying to make sure that core temperature doesn't go up. So the trigger for sweating happens sooner as you become more fit, believe it or not. It's a funny mechanism. It almost seems to be in reverse, like, well, maybe you hold off on getting or having sweat, but no, it's exact opposite. You sweat sooner and you sweat more at that point. And so your sweat mechanism is improved by having more blood volume as well. And you're able to shunt blood to the skin to be able to get that heat to the skin for that evaporation to happen. So those are just a few quick ones.
I love the fact you talked about blood volume. So this is a big mechanism, is that we actually can hold on to more blood, and more,
Mhm.
basically it's not blood, it's really water in the blood. Like it's more plasma. So this actually happens. It's really interesting stuff. So if you think about it, if you hold on to, let's say, 10 or 15% more water, just
Mhm.
because you've adapted, you actually have the ability to release more and to sweat more. And it's a really an interesting one, because some people get really caught up in this, and they start to adapt and they gain weight,
Mhm. Yeah, right.
especially people that weigh themselves often. And this is a dangerous thing to, especially when you're adapting to heat, is understanding that one of the big mechanisms is actually to hold on to more water.
Mm-hmm.
So if you held on to, let's say, an extra liter of water, that would be very, very advantageous for you
Yeah.
in racing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you weigh yourself often and you're
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't want to do that. And so then you start to hold back on drinking and on maybe even eating, that would be a negative stress in the system. So
Mm-hmm.
understanding that, that's a big positive adaptation that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get caught up into the, oh, I'm gaining weight. You're actually gaining an advantage of water. There's a supplement that people use to actually hold on to more water. So you I don't know, John, if you're familiar with glycerin.
No. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, but not for the, now you say that, yes, yeah.
So it was banned for a while. It's not anymore. But athletes will actually utilize glycerin. I don't recommend it, but people will do this to actually hold on to more water at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning of a long race.
Yeah.
And basically, it's storing more water. But we can have a natural mechanism of doing that, of actually adapting to heat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's really interesting. You lose that extra water really, really quick. So if you've been adapting to the, let's say you went to Hawaii for a couple of weeks and you started to hold on to more water, and then you came back in the winter to, and even to Las Vegas, within 2 or 3 days, you actually start to lose it.
Wow.
You don't hold on to it very long, but once you have it, so if you're in Vegas and you're training outside regularly or doing heat training regularly, you can hold on to that for like the whole summer,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even until it starts to cool down. But and this is actually one of the mechanisms we utilize when we do heat adaptation, specific heat adaptation training for like fall races in particular. Or John, when you went to Mexico, you were doing we talked about this already. You were doing some heat adaptations. One of those mechanisms that was a big one was actually holding on to more water.
Mm-hmm.
The other one you mentioned was the earlier sweat and the more sweat. So this is another fun fact for a Canadian like me. So um, Canadians or people from further north, you may notice in Las Vegas in the summer, or sorry, in the winter, they're the ones at the pool. So my wife used to be a lifeguard at one of the casinos on the Strip, and they could always tell, like, when the pool opened in the spring, the only people kind of hanging out by the pool were the Canadians,
Mm-hmm.
right? And basically they were adapted to the colder weather.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that ultimately happens when you're adapted to the cold is not only does it take longer for the sweat to start, but you actually sweat in less spots.
Mm-hmm.
So as you adapt, you can always tell us desert dwellers, we sweat all over,
Yeah.
right? You're sweating from pores in your arms, you're sweating
Mm-hmm.
from your legs. People from they're not adapted to heat will tend to only sweat in their forehead, their under their armpits,
Right.
and maybe in their pubic area. But as we adapt, we actually sweat in more places, which is a really cool thing. But really crummy for me when I go to Canada, especially in the winter. I'm frozen all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have no ability to withstand any cold
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, right.
But anyways, I think that's another really interesting thing that happens.
Oh, I love it. And then there's also a hormonal response of not or producing less urine. And
Yep.
which is again part of that mechanism to hold on to fluid. And so there's some adaptation to that as well.
Yeah. I believe it's antidiuretic hormone.
Yeah.
Yep. And that so antidiuretic basically means you're not going to produce as much urine. And when you're adapted, you actually produce more antidiuretic hormone,
Mm-hmm.
which is really an interesting thing as well, that we can actually slow down the production of urine,
Mm-hmm.
which is really, it's a good thing, but it's also not necessarily a good thing, because potentially we could be not getting rid of some metabolic waste that we
Yeah,
maybe
right,
should.
right. And that could be a problem. And then one
Yeah.
that's not so much physiological, but there is a mental adaptation as well to heat. And this is partly why you mentioned I was doing some heat adaptation for Campeche. And that's partly what I wanted to just get my brain wrapped around feeling hot again. Yeah, because training for Campeche in the spring, winter, it wasn't hot. And so, having that that mental experience of, or being ready for that, is an important part.
Yeah, it's interesting, this week in particular, and I've had several people that I coach comment, "Oh my gosh, it's so hot.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can't train in the afternoon because it's too hot." And I'm like, well, in 2 or 3 weeks, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
Right. And, if let's say on your schedule, it was a 5 mile run, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. Just bring some water, make sure you do your loop, that you've got a water stop or two at it,
Mhm.
just more for comfort. You'll be fine. It's not, not an intense run today, or not an intense, you'll be okay. And you're right. A lot of it is just the mental of, especially, living in Las Vegas, this, you did a long day of work, driving home in the car is hot, even though you get air conditioning, it's still hot. You're
Mhm.
sweating to the seat. And
Yep.
then, oh my gosh, I got a 90-minute bike I got to go do.
Mhm.
Even on the trainer, that's hard,
It
right? Because
is. Mhm.
you've just felt that kind of heat all the time.
Mhm.
And let's say in the winter, it's easy. You get home from work, you're like, oh, I'm gonna jump on the trainer, and you actually kind of warm up.
Mhm.
And I do believe a lot of that is actually a mental,
Yeah.
a mental thing. Yeah.
No, that is important, and having some skills to be able to handle that or know what to expect, is part of it. Um, Another strategy is, and I know you do this as well, cover up. Because
Yeah.
one of the sources that we, not only do we generate heat through muscle contraction, but another source is obviously the sun, or the reflective heat off the ground, being on the street. And I'm sure you experience this, biking home on a hot day, just being on that road, you're getting beat up bad from, not only the sun, direct light, but then also what's coming off the ground.
Yeah, it's funny because you can tell those people that are really like Vegas people and really figure things out is when I get to a light and I have to stop, I'll sometimes stop like 20 yards
Yeah.
sooner if there's a tree,
Yeah.
right? If I can get in the shade, or there's a light post and I can, like, I
Yeah.
stop, I
Yeah.
go up to the light post, I'm just in the shade for just that few
Totally.
minutes.
Yeah.
And that's another secret to adaptation, is knowing your environment and
Yeah.
using and utilizing your environment. Because you're right, like there's some days, especially like in the core of Las Vegas, around the strip, it really gets hot on the tarmac.
Mhm.
My Garmin is reading 118, 119 degrees. Well,
Mhm.
I'm feeling that. And now you're right, you got heat coming from the ground, and then heat coming from
Yep.
the top. And it's funny because I do wear arm sleeves often,
Yep.
white arm sleeves.
Mhm.
And once again, they're wet when I leave work,
Yeah.
right? Like they're completely wet, and
Mhm.
within 10 minutes they're dry, and
Yeah.
I just spray some water on them.
It's pretty
And
amazing.
it's like, why is this person, covered up?
Mhm.
Well, I'd like to avoid skin cancer, but I'd also like to, actually mitigate the heat.
Mhm. You did a race with a team, and I'm trying to remember what it was. I think it was in the, Mojave Desert. And
Mojave Death Race. I did
yeah,
two times.
yeah, and you were using, slushy drinks. Talk about that.
Yeah, so this is a really cool one. Is we actually had a blender with ice, and um, so this is cool stuff. What's cool is you can actually create what's called a heat sink inside your body.
Mhm.
So if you can ingest ice and get it into your stomach, heat will actually go into your stomach, right? And it'll actually and cold will go out of your stomach. So in the research they call it an ice slurry.
Yeah. Mhm.
And there's lots of people that have tried to do this in triathlon,
Mhm.
and there's actually a company out of New Zealand that has a special bottle
Mhm.
that actually has a top on it to allow, like, basically a Slurpee to come out. And it really does work. And there's lots of research on it. The only hard thing is in triathlon is how do you keep it to
Yeah.
so you get to the run and you've got that. Because
Yeah.
remember, you can't have outside assistance.
Right.
So I've thought a lot about this, and I thought about what if you had a cooler at T2,
Mhm.
dry ice in it, and your bottle was a slush to
Yeah.
begin with. And I think that's how you
I
do it,
think
by the way.
that would be the way to do it. It's, I've thought about that as well, as in trying to take a little, you know, bag that's a reflective bag that is keeps things cool, but I
I
haven't,
think you gotta have dry ice.
yeah, yeah, or
So, so
salt,
I will,
salt in the ice, and things like that to keep it cooler.
so I will tell you, I did do this when I did my Everesting.
Mm-hmm.
So this is now 2 or 3 years, 3 years ago now. Um, a friend of the show, Julie, she actually went to Sonic and basically on the edge of town and got a Slurpee for me
Mm-hmm.
and put it in a water bottle. And I actually had two of them on my ride because I don't know if you remember that day. It got really hot, especially near the bottom. It was over 100,
Yeah.
and it was really, I was getting my water bottles at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, a few people brought me water along the way that was a little bit cooler, but it was getting really, really hot. And that actually, I was kind of worried on that day that that would actually be the thing that did me in was the heat more than anything, just being out for that many hours. And the Slurpees made all the difference in the world, like
Mm-hmm.
actually getting that core down. So one of the things that I've been doing in hot races is when I get ice, is I'm trying to ingest it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I get a cup of ice and I can chew it a little bit in my mouth,
Yeah.
and then and I'll try and swallow it and create a little bit of a heat sink. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a winning strategy to get. If
Mm-hmm.
you think about it, if you had cold on the inside, that's going to be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of the mechanism is also that you're getting that cold in here, and then the blood flow is then
Yep.
influenced, and the blood flow ultimately hits the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is your temperature regulator. And as long as it's saying, hey, blood's okay, temperature wise, everything's good to go. And so there's some good research, as you said, on taking ice drinks, slushies, things that get your inside cold, and because it does help the blood circulation, actually is going to be cooler at that point.
So pro tip: if you're riding around Las Vegas and you're doing your longer rides, go to Sonic because you can go to you can bring your bike right up, and they have Powerade slushes.
Yeah.
And I've done it many times. I think in the afternoon there's a sale. They're like half price in the afternoon or something,
Oh
like
yeah.
after 2 o'clock. And there's been many times where I've actually done that, where I'm like, you know, riding home from work, I'm going a little bit of a longer route. I'm like, oh, I know there's a Sonic over there,
Yeah.
and I'll get a Slurpee and a slushy, and it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
So there's a pro tip: if you got like yourself a 5 hour ride in the summer, I know everyone likes to get out of town and maybe do a loop where you could loop it back around. They must have slushies at the McDonald's in Searchlight.
Oh, I don't know. I actually haven't gone all the way to Searchlight in some time now, so I
Mm,
gotta do that again. But yeah,
yeah, there you go. So you got to plan your slushies.
yeah, there you go. Yeah, I've loved that ride. I just have not. Haven't been doing any full distances for some
Oh,
time
that's
now,
true.
so I haven't really had the need to go that long. So, what are some
Yeah.
other things that you do, either training or racing, to keep cool or
Well,
to?
number one for me, honestly, and this is something that I try and tell the people that I coach even, is to actually expose yourself to heat.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're going to be training in Las Vegas, once again, we've talked about this. Training in Las Vegas is one of the best places to train in the world because you can expose yourself to a lot of different stresses. And I don't necessarily, I'm not a fan of people waking up at 4 in the morning and going for their 5 hour bike ride.
Mm-hmm.
I think wake up at your normal time and go for your ride and just let your body adapt
Mm-hmm.
to the heat and utilize that as an extra stress. And I know it's not as enjoyable, maybe. Well, to me, it's enjoyable not waking up at 4 in the morning.
Yeah.
But if I'm on the road by 7 and I'm getting home, let's say it's a 5 hour ride, I get home at noon. I know it's hot, but I've actually stressed my system.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if I'm going to do like a race that's going to be hot, I want I want to expose myself to it, and I don't want to necessarily be avoiding it. And then we can go on the whole tangent about how important sleep is, right? So if you're cutting your sleep so you can wake up early to train to avoid heat, I think that's maybe not a good strategy. And that's
Mm-hmm.
once again, that's my opinion on it.
Yeah.
Uh,
And
so
this is one of the things that you and I disagree on, or in practice, I disagree with you. And in theory, I do agree with you. if you want to get heat adapted, you gotta be in the heat. Getting up at 4 a.m. though, I actually enjoy that. Getting out with the lights. I haven't done it in a while, but having a light and being on the trail before the sun comes up, there's a neat feeling to that.
Oh,
And
I'm not disagreeing that it's awesome to do that every now and then. Like
but the other part, on the stress part, I try to be really careful. And you asked this earlier on about training the heat. I try to be careful because I recognize how much of a stress added heat can add to the body. And so if you're not planning on that and you just go for a ride and say, oh, well, I'll do the same ride I'm going to do every day, and I'm just going to do it in the hot temperature, you're going to end up having some exercise issues at that point because
no,
you're
no,
going to
yeah,
be recovering.
yeah, I
Yep.
totally agree. And
Yep.
one thing I will tell you that and even the people I coach, they probably have been noticing I've been going even easier on their long rides right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
As I know that they're adapting right now.
Hmm.
It's like, super easy, still volume. The volume is the same, but I'm trying to actually tone it down because I understand that heat is another stress to the system.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and it's really cool. There's some good research on it. I wish I could remember the paper that was actually comparing heat adaptation to altitude adaptations.
Oh, it's the same stuff.
It's the same
Yeah.
mechanisms,
Yeah.
right? As far as the blood plasma volume.
Hmm.
And so once again, it can be very advantageous
Hmm.
to train in the heat, even if you're going to go to a cool race,
Right.
you know.
And same
So,
thing, like if you're gonna go train at altitude and you just go up to altitude, that's great.
oh
You're
yeah,
gonna get the training response, but if you keep trying to do the same training program, you're gonna end
you
up
can't.
overdoing it and overcooking,
Yeah,
even at altitude. So,
yeah,
you know,
yeah. And I've done some altitude camps on my
Mhm.
own, and you've got to be very, very careful. Like if you start going, you go to significant altitude and think that you're going to do the same power output. You can, but the
Mhm.
stress on the system is so great that and you could do it, but then you need more recovery.
Right. So
And so it's always
let's
this
go
balance.
down that a little bit because I know that you cover this in your athletic training teaching. Or what are signs that people should watch for as they're exercising that maybe they need to get out of the heat?
Yeah. So number one thing, honestly, is on the inside, because once again, the thing that happens is you mentally start to get a little bit foggy.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start to notice that, number one, you're getting a little bit foggy, or you're maybe not making good decisions all of a sudden, like that's a really good indicator.
Yeah.
Number two, if you've been feeling really hot for a long period of time, that's another good indicator. The thing is, when you start to actually go down the really negative side of we said it's really difficult to get into heat stroke, but of going into heat stroke, it actually it mimics kind of a concussion. It mimics kind of being drunk, in that
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily recognize that you're mentally not as cognizant as you should be.
Right.
And so it's really, really difficult to tell on your own.
Mm-hmm.
um, Once again, it's very difficult to get to that spot when we're doing the kind of training that we're doing, but that would be the thing, especially if you're training with somebody else
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and you're asking them a question and they're having trouble answering it. um, those are good signs. And once again, like you can make this happen to yourself. Like you can get into situations with heat exhaustion and heat stroke if, once again, you're going too hard for too long. You absolutely can. And if you're in a group, be aware of that. If someone's not making sense, like it's kind of like those early warning signs even of stroke. you
Mm-hmm.
know it's very similar. It's interesting we call it heat stroke. um Once again, we don't see it very often in endurance
Right.
athletes, especially when you have access to water. it's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's more when you don't.
Right.
And so I know that's kind of a long-winded response, but
No, no,
it's
no,
really
that's
hard to
good.
see. It's really hard to see on yourself. Like that's the hard thing, is your body starts to trick itself. Your
No, I
mind
love
starts
it.
to trick itself.
And you're right. It's not happening a lot to athletes. It probably happening hikers or people who are
Yep.
unaccustomed to being here in Vegas. But now let's complete that sort of story, if you will. What happens if you are feeling like you've overdone it in the heat, or you see someone that is? What's your response?
Yeah, that's so interesting. So the number one thing for the layperson, not for a professional rescuer, but for the layperson, is get them cool as
Mhm.
quick as you can.
Yeah.
So, um, you know, what we would really love to do is ice water immersion.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, you can't do that,
Right.
right? So, whatever it takes to get somebody as cool as you can, as quick as you can.
Mm-hmm.
If that means you're out on the highway and you're on your bike and you have to flag down somebody to get them into a car
Mm-hmm.
and get the air conditioning on them, whatever you can do to get
Mm-hmm.
them as cool as you can, as quick as you can.
Mm-hmm.
And um, it's like, once again, I'll just tell you, like in Las Vegas at the high schools, every high school in the summer has got an ice tub.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They can't practice outside unless they have an ice tub.
Right.
And they're actually just instituting that this year in the Las Vegas high schools, from my understanding, is they're going to be doing rectal thermometry,
Mm-hmm.
and so measuring core temperature directly, and then using ice tubs to cool them. And the mantra right now is cool first, transport second.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we don't even take people to the hospital. You cool them first.
Yeah.
So number one thing is you've got to get them cool. So if you're once again, you're out hiking with somebody and you're starting to see this and you're way up somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
it's what can I do to get them out of here as quickly as I can?
That's right.
And that might be, calling a helicopter. I
Mm-hmm.
hate to say it because it's not good to do. I mean, I kind of, like a lot of people, I have a Garmin InReach. Like you put me onto that
Mm-hmm.
when I'm out doing things. Like on this trip I've been on, I have my Garmin InReach just in case.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was with somebody and I was noticing these signs, I would use it
Yeah.
because it literally is life and death.
No, I love
So
it. And your advice of getting them cool is number one. And that's even more important than getting fluid in them. It's
yep.
getting them as cool as possible, as quickly as possible, is so important. You know, it's fun. I was doing Vineman years ago when it was Vineman full, and it was an independent a race at that point. I got talking with the doctor who was overseeing the medical tent, and it was a hot race. And I got talking to him afterwards, and I said, well, you must be going through a lot of IVs. And he says, no, we don't do a lot of IVs now anymore. And this was probably 10 years ago at this point. He said, no, we're doing cooling. And then I asked him, well, how do you distinguish between or treatment for overheating versus hyponatremia, which I know we want to talk about. And he said, well, it depends on when he's getting people into the med tent. If he's getting the 9, 10-hour, maybe 11-hour athletes, he's treating them for heat injury. If it's someone closer to 14, 15, 16 hours, he's treating them more for hyponatremia. And, for the heat injuries, he would get them cool and then administer an IV if called for. But it was an interesting discussion. So hyponatremia is that other heat injury that has that we understand that people are more at risk for than even a heat injury.
Yeah, let's just talk about hyponatremia really quickly, because this was a big topic probably 10 years ago. We were seeing
Mhm.
this, and that people were ingesting too much water,
Yeah.
basically, and not enough electrolytes along with their
Mhm.
water. And it's actually hard to get enough electrolytes in with your water. But there was this message on for everywhere. Oh, drink water, drink water. You're going to do a marathon, got to drink water.
Mhm.
And what ends up happening is you end up diluting the blood sodium. And we measure blood sodium it's in millimoles per deciliter, I think is the unit. And it's basically below 130 millimoles per deciliter is hyponatremia. And what ends up happening is when you get to that certain point, the cells in your body start to swell.
Mhm.
And in particular, they swell in your brain is the problem. And if untreated, it can kill you. Okay.
Mhm.
So you mentioned it's a heat thing. It can be, but it also cannot be. So I think it was the New York City Marathon was the one that they did, or maybe it was Boston. It was one of the East Coast marathons. They took blood samples of, I can't remember what the percentage was, a lot of people, but like 20% of the finishers were hyponatremic. This is about a
Mhm.
decade
Right.
ago. And what has happened in the world of endurance sports is it's switched, right? It used to be drink, 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 drink. Now it's drink, but drink with electrolytes.
Mhm.
So drink things with sodium, and that will help prevent that. But yeah, it was a big problem for a while, where people were basically thinking, oh, and I've got to keep hydrated
Yeah, right. And I'm
to
glad you clarified this, because the hyponatremia is not necessarily heat injury. I think I misspoke when I said that. It's an overhydration problem, and that's
right,
why at Vineman, what the physician was talking about was when you're in the race longer, doing it for 16 hours, your intensity is lower, so you're not
yep,
building up that heat, and you have the opportunity to take in more and more fluid, not only because you're out there longer, but also because maybe you're walking more, you're more periods of time, or maybe you're stopping, you're drinking at every aid station. Whereas if you're, doing the 9-10 hours, you're running through, maybe you're getting enough for, just barely enough fluid at that point. And so
yep.
the people who are doing the race longer, they're at a greater risk for hyponatremia than the people who are crossing the finish line at a faster time.
Especially if they're only ingesting water.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But even
Um,
it's been shown
even if
that even a lot of the drinks out there, they don't have enough electrolytes to replace.
exactly,
You can be drinking those drinks and still not get enough
will
and
not have enough. Yep.
hyponatremia.
Especially if you're drinking a lot of them.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's right.
once again, in the longer endurance sports, and I don't know, I don't think Ironman's doing it anymore. They used to weigh people. Remember that?
Yeah, but I think there was one Ironman, I want to say it was 82, that they weighed athletes at the halfway point.
Yeah. And so, but in like ultra running and even some of the ultra cycling events,
Hmm.
they're actually at the aid stations are weighing people.
Hmm.
They used to do it historically for they would pull you if you lost too much body weight.
Hmm.
But now on these, there's also a check if you've gained body weight.
Oh, yeah, yeah, right,
So you should not gain.
right.
So if you've gained body weight,
Hmm.
your chances of having hyponatremia are really high. And so
Hmm.
they can pull you from the race if you've actually gained weight. Which is the thing about it, like if you're doing a 100 miler and you're 50-mile aid station and you've gained a pound or two, you probably are doing something pretty negative to your system.
I often tell my students when I talk about this topic, I say, if you end the race at the same weight that you started, you did things wrong, because
Yeah, you're probably hyponatremic.
yeah, you could be hyponatremic, but you've done something, you've overhydrated that point, because when you're exercising, the fuel that you're using has mass. And so once you've used that fuel, you should be losing weight because you're losing fat, you're losing carbohydrate that's stored in the system. And so you don't want to end your exercise session or your race at the same weight as you started.
I love this. I love this topic because it's so fun. I was talking to some of my students about this. I think it was a year ago now. How do you lose weight? Well, you lose weight by actually exhaling carbon dioxide.
Mhm.
And carbon dioxide has mass to it. That's really how you lose stuff,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And carbon dioxide is a byproduct of metabolism, right?
Mhm.
Exactly what you're saying. And when you breathe it out, oxygen has weight when you breathe it in, right? But
Mhm.
when you breathe out the carbon dioxide, that's what how you actually lose weight. And so I'm so glad you said that, because like it's such an odd fact, and it's a fun fact, but you actually have to do that. And yeah, if you go into like an endurance event, let's say you do an Ironman and you burn 5,000 calories, there's a lot of carbon and carbon
Mhm.
dioxide that is leaving the body, um, that you've actually, as a byproduct of metabolism. Super, super interesting. I did want to
So,
add for hyponatremia, John, really quickly. Um, the earliest sign for hyponatremia is a headache.
mhm.
And so you should not, when you're doing an endurance activity, it is very, very rare to actually have a headache, because you have so many like endorphins and cortisol and all these things that actually kind of tamp down
Mhm.
people that have headaches. So if you're I don't know, volunteered at an aid station or something, and someone's like, oh my gosh, I have a really bad headache,
Right.
that should be a red flag. Um, Unless they crash their bike along the way. or fallen, but it's a big red flag that they could potentially have hyponatremia. So I just wanted to throw that one out because you asked earlier about signs of heat. Well, signs of hyponatremia, it kind of looks a little bit like a concussion, but
Mhm.
obviously they didn't bang their head, so headache is a good sign.
Oh, I love it. And you know, it's funny on the respiration part, one of the slides that I use in my class when I talk about heat balance is respiration. And respiration is a big part of not a big part. It is a part of heat balance and ultimately, you know, the caloric burn. But the classic way to determine how many calories you're using during exercise is to put someone in a special room that measures, that's very sensitive to changes in air temperature. And so the changes in air temperature in this enclosed room is because the body is heating up. It's giving off that heat. And that heat is another sign of the calories that are actually being used. So it's not, it's respiration, it's heat as well. So, but these funny things come into play when you do start talking about how you lose weight.
Yeah, it's to me that was
And
a super
sweating.
fun
I mean,
fact.
obviously sweat, you know, you weigh yourself before and after, you've lost water, and that's oh,
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I should say other than water, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but actual losing mass of your body,
Mhm.
it's breathing it out, which is I think is really cool. Okay, so John, what are some of our takeaways for people that are trying to adapt?
Uh, Patience.
Yeah,
And our last episode was on recovery. You really need to, which we haven't talked about much here, but we've implied it in several parts. You've got to treat exercise in the heat as adding extra stress to you. It's adding another workout. It's making that workout harder, and you need to respect that and build that recovery in afterwards, hydration afterwards, eat afterwards.
yeah, no, for sure. So understand it's an added stress. The kind of one of my big takeaways is especially if it gets hot quickly, is to maybe go a little bit easier,
Hmm.
right? So if you were going to do your ride at, I don't know, 4 hours at 180 watts, maybe do 160 watts.
Yeah.
You'll notice your heart rate probably is very similar,
Hmm.
um, but just as you're adapting, I think it's good to do that. And then I would also avoid outside long like tempo right in the beginning, right?
Hmm.
Where you're actually working really hard. We're doing like, I don't know, 3 by 20 minute runs at at race pace.
Hmm.
Probably not good in the beginning. Now, eventually, you should be able to build up to that, but probably in the beginning, I would avoid that kind of thing. Um,
And then
and
my
more so on the run probably than on the bike. And we actually didn't talk
yeah,
too much about this, but the advantage of the bike is, especially where we live, is the evaporative cooling
yeah.
and
Hmm.
airflow.
Hmm.
So we're running, you just don't get that.
Yeah, and funny when we were doing St. George, we're running one direction with a tailwind, and that was harder than running back in the headwind because of the heating. You're losing that evaporative effect, that wind effect, even the convection that happens with the wind moving over you. And I
You,
guess
you,
my
you're right. My least favorite thing is a hot race, especially on the bike going uphill with a tailwind.
yeah, right.
It's funny you mentioned St. George because some of
Yeah,
the hottest I've ever been
yeah.
was in that Ironman where we're going up Snow Canyon at mile 95 and
Hmm.
then we get a tailwind,
Yeah.
right? And it's like noon and the sun, it wasn't even that hot. It was only probably like 80 degrees at that time. But when the wind is pushing you at basically the same speed that you're going,
Hmm.
you're generating a lot of heat by climbing up this thing. Even if you're wet, you just don't have the evaporative cooling as much. So you're absolutely right.
And then my final take home is it's all about core temperature. You got
Yeah.
to manage core temperature.
Yeah, I messed around a lot with that core temperature monitor, the one that
Hmm.
goes on the side. And I know
Yeah.
friend of the show, Vernice, she did her thesis with that. It actually they work, right?
Mhm.
It's pretty they're pretty accurate. So if you haven't seen them, a lot of the Tour de France riders wear them. Blumenfeld uses one. A lot of them, like the Norwegians, are using it in the summer for a lot of their heat adaptation. where you can actually see on your head unit or on your watch, you can actually see your core temperature live,
Mm-hmm.
and they're pretty accurate. Um, it's really kind of, this is high level stuff, but you can train at a higher temperature, and you can actually see this. This is what, once again, what the Norwegians are doing. They're finding that, hey, like 101.7 is like the optimal level. I don't know what their number they're using,
Mm-hmm.
is the optimal level for adaptation. And so they're doing stuff like on, in indoors, they're actually creating the environment with just changing airflow that can get to that kind of the magic number to allow them
Mm-hmm.
to. But if they get too high, the stress becomes too high,
Right, right.
and they don't adapt as quickly. Now,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't have that. You can buy it. I think they're like $300, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying go out and buy one. But if you really wanted to get into it, there's some really fascinating stuff on how you can adapt quicker.
There is some neat wearable technology that keeps coming out.
Absolutely. All right, John. Well,
Good
hey, it's
stuff.
been an hour. It's Sunday night, so I guess we should let you go.
Yeah,
Um, super nice chatting with you. Congratulations again on your race.
yeah, thanks, and congrats to your athlete, Stephanie, and congrats on being in 70-degree temps.
Yeah, I'm so excited. It's I'm just holding my fingers like this, that it doesn't do like Coeur d'Alene does sometimes, where race weekend it gets to 100 degrees, because
Yeah,
I won't be adapted.
yeah.
Because
No,
I'm riding in the cool here.
uh,
Um, but anyways, yeah, it's good.
that's
I'm
awesome.
happy up here.
Well,
All
enjoy your
right,
time up there, and we'll catch up next week.
you got it.
All right,
Okay, bye
talk soon.
everybody.